Hi, I'm Dave Stubbs, sports columnist with the Montreal Gazette. Some people would say that I've been covering the Montreal Canadiens since the days of Howie Morenz and Aurel Joliat and Georges Vezina. Not entirely true, although I have seen an awful lot of good hockey players come through this city. It's an awful lot of fun spending time with these guys. You never know what's going to happen with the Canadiens, never a dull moment. You can cover this team 13 months of the year, 25 hours a day, and you still haven't done your job, as far as some fans will tell you. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm on the line with David Stein.
La belle passe à Galchenyuk qui s'avance et le but! Alex Galchenyuk!
Hi, I'm Matthew Darge. Before I played for the Montreal Canadiens, I played for the McGill Redmen. You're watching David Stein, the best sports reporter at McGill University.
Doing Galchenyuk to Brendan Gallagher.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of On the Line with David Stein. I'm pleased to welcome my guest, Dave Stubbs. Thanks for doing this, Dave.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The first thing I want to ask you is what gave you the first itch to get into this industry? Was there a hockey memory in your early days that gave you the itch to work in this industry?
First memory really that would be strong would be crying myself to sleep when the Canadiens traded Rogie Vachon. Rogie was my first favorite. He was my first hero. I had liked Gump Worsley, Charlie Hodge before that, played road hockey. I was Rogie. I was probably the first kid on the block who had that god-awful LA Kings jersey. But I think that once I started playing ball hockey, and if you grow up in Montreal, obviously the Montreal Canadiens are in your blood, and I had a grade 10 teacher named Gordon Blackman at John Rennie High School who instilled in me a love of writing, and he kept challenging me to do better and better, and I sent in the occasional column I call it, the occasional composition that talked about hockey and so on, and he really challenged me to be a better writer, and I think that I had that itch. My father was in broadcasting for many years. I thought I might follow him into broadcasting, but the written word, for some reason, for me, just seemed to have a greater appeal. So it was wonderful to kind of get into it, stumble almost into it a little bit, but since 1976 when I got into the business, it's been a wonderful ride.
Over the course of an 82-game schedule, is there ever a time where you get a little bit tired of writing? Is there ever a morning you wake up and you say, gee, I wish, this morning I could just take it easy and spend time with my friends? Or
Yeah, oftentimes that happens. The thing is, you don't really have enough of a chance to let that incubate, because inevitably you're on Twitter at 6 o'clock in the morning and you hit the ground running, and really that's what this business has become. There's so many different platforms. Social media now has changed everything. All of the rules are being changed. It's very much a moving target, how we try to cover hockey, how we try to do anything in the business. But yeah, there's some days when you just are finding that you're running out of gas. At the end of the playoffs this past May, when the Canadiens were knocked out in the 6th game against the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Final, you wake up the next morning and you take a very deep breath and you say, thank God it's over. And I know the players and the fans, everyone goes into this immediate depression, and there's this great sense of having hit a wall, having gone that far. But once you stop and you realize that you've been running on adrenaline, you've literally been on fumes. And that was the way it was for all of us on the beat. There's nothing uglier than a sports writer or a sports journalist about 3/4 of the way into the playoffs, because we haven't been sleeping, we've been taking weird flights, we've been eating badly, and it's just not pretty at all.
what's the second best press gallery in the NHL?
Second best. Montreal is going to be the best, of course, and I don't say that just lightly because I work in Montreal, but you talk to you talk to Bob Cole, who has been with CBC forever and ever and ever, now with Rogers. You talk to some of these guys who've been around the NHL a long time. When they built this building, they really did an absolutely wonderful job putting it together. I mean, for the media, it's terrific. I would think that Boston's is good. I like the TD Garden, and it's because I've probably spent more time there going for playoffs and so on. At the other end of it, the Air Canada Centre is dreadful for hockey media because that was built for the Toronto Raptors. That was a basketball building, and they sort of threw hockey on as an afterthought. And literally single file, you can't get up and down through the media gallery. There's some buildings where you can get totally lost in. And one of my favorite memories about this place, when I was very early on, I came into the building one evening to cover a game, and I heard this banging down a hallway. I went and opened the door, and there was General Manager Bob Gainey, who had locked himself in a corridor, and he had no idea how to get out. He was in there. If I hadn't found him, Bob may still be banging around in the bowels of the Bell Center.
You've developed quite close working relationships with a lot of the players in the Montreal Canadiens. Is it difficult for you at any point to remain objective, and how do you do so?
I don't think objectivity is ever a problem, David. I think the issue becomes if you are fair with players, they can take any amount of criticism you're going to dish out at them. There are a number of people in the journalism business who, with the competition nowadays and deadlines and maybe some bad judgment, I think, and this is just me speaking, who will take the shortcut to do a story. a quote won't necessarily, if a player's not misquoted, the interpretation of the quote is wrong. You've heard taken out of context. That can happen. I've always had a good relationship with the players in the sense that I have the cell number of, I think, virtually every Montreal Canadien on my iPhone, and that doesn't come accidentally. You also want to play by the rules. The team has a good public relations team here. They have a good media crew, so you go through them, and there's a protocol you follow to do interviews and so on. But sometimes in the summer, I mean, I can send a note to Andrei Markov, or I can send a text to Tomas Plekanec, and they get back to you. If they choose they don't want to get back to you, if they've dropped off the face of the earth, fine, they have. But it's their option, and they can get back to you. So in terms of the objectivity, no, I think you look at the game, you'll get criticized by fans from other teams sometimes. They will say, oh, you're a team this and that, and you try to say, look, it's not my team. And they say, who are you cheering for? And I've been asked that on the road many times, and you say, I'm cheering for a good game. And there's a famous expression we use, there's no cheering in the press box, and that is to mean that you're supposed to be objective. You're not supposed to be cheering for any team or any one player. I will tell you today that's a dirty lie. There is cheering in the press box. You want the game to be over on time. You want it to be about a 3-goal margin, so there's no chance of overtime or a shootout. You want to make your deadlines. You don't want anyone hurt. That's what I cheer for. And I cheer for the best story. Sometimes it's in the Boston Bruins dressing room. Sometimes it's in the Maple Leafs room. Sometimes it's in the Habs room. For me as a columnist, I cheer for the best story always.
The last couple years, the Montreal Canadiens have taken steps forward in each of the last 2 years after a debacle in 2011-12. Why is it in this market that the coach never gets credit?
That's a good question. I think that every single night at the Bell Centre, there are 21,273 people who can do a better job than Michel Therrien. Marc Bergevin, same thing. And I've had this discussion with Bergevin before, and he said the minute that, I think it might have been Sam Pollock, or it was the general manager well before Bergevin, who said the minute you start thinking like a fan, you'll become one. Meaning you're going to be out on your behind. I mean, you're not going to survive in this city or anywhere if you let the fans dictate what you do. That's not to say that the Canadiens don't pay attention, Habs management don't pay attention to the fans. They don't pay attention to what the tone is in the city. They understand what's going on. They hear what's being said. That said, they have to make the moves that they think are in the best interest of the organization long term. It's not a matter of doing something because they think something's going to be a quick fix. Do you go out necessarily and grab someone at trade deadline because you think he's the one piece that's going to complete that puzzle? Do you take a chance of upsetting the chemistry in the dressing room when you do that? So, yeah, Therrien stands up before us every single night and he'll talk, and he knows that there are guys in that room who are going to second guess him in print the next day. But you're right. I mean, there's always, I think, was there not a Fire Therrien hashtag on Twitter? I think last year, maybe the year before too. And you're always going to get that. And you get the same thing for Bergevin. These guys know it. I wouldn't say that they're bulletproof. Their hides aren't bulletproof, but these guys understand that they have to work in the best interest of the organization. And when they sit down on the 7th floor of this building and they talk about what is going on with this team, they're making decisions based on hockey operations and their own people, their own specialists who make the hockey decisions, and not the common thought or the consensus of the fans in this city.
Last week, Saku Koivu called it a career, and there's obviously a lot of debate about whether or not his number should be hanging up here in this building. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you whether it should or it shouldn't, but I will ask you this. If it is retired by the Montreal Canadiens at some point, does that change the standard for this organization?
Good question. Some people would say that it does. Saku Koivu has told me that he doesn't believe that his number should be in the rafters of the Bell Centre. I did the arithmetic a couple weeks ago when Koivu announced his retirement from the Anaheim Ducks, and I think I came up with something like 104 cumulative Stanley Cups won by the guys whose numbers have been retired. Is the Stanley Cup the gold standard? Is it the standard that you use? That is what it appears to be behind us now. I mean, the numbers that hang from the rafters here really celebrate some absolutely wonderful hockey players who have come through this city. Koivu transcended the game of hockey, unlike anyone that I have seen in my time covering this club. I would say the only other person I can think of in the history of this franchise who would have done that would be Jean Beliveau, who I just had the privilege to see really in the back nine of his career. I was just a teenager when he was finishing up his career in 1971. Koivu, the work that he did in the community, some of the intolerance that he put up with in this city for the language issue. He was captain of some pretty dreadful teams in the city too, and he had to sort of suffer through that a little bit, and those were not necessarily, that was not his fault that team was not succeeding. So the work that he's done and the legacy that he has left with the PET-CT scan machine at the Montreal General for cancer patients he'd never meet. I mean, Koivu is a remarkable person, and he's probably the second best person I would know in hockey. Mr. Beliveau would be the first, but Koivu really transcended the game.
What's the best advice that you were ever given, and who gave that to you?
I think probably be honest in your work. I mean, as cliched as it sounds, it's give 100 cents on the dollar. It's don't take shortcuts. And when you do, I think probably some of the best advice I've gotten would have been from my dear friend Red Fisher, who was my sports editor. When I left the Gazette in would have been 1980, I went to work in Ottawa for 8 years with the Canadian Olympic team and then came back to the Gazette in '88. Red told me how important it was to do your research and to be prepared and to listen. And there are so many people, I think, in this business now, and maybe it's because the opinion is a very important part of what the media have become. It's trying to shape opinion. I think sometimes what I like to do is be more of a storyteller. I like people to come away from a story maybe knowing something about an athlete that they wouldn't have known necessarily. And for me, the greatest part of doing an interview is when you ask an athlete a question and they say, how do you know that? It just shows that you've done your homework. So I think a matter of listening and not always thinking that you have to push your opinion on people. It's give them enough information to let them form their own opinions, because I think sometimes in the media we tend to not give our readers and our viewers enough credit for the intelligence that they have. We're so busy trying to dictate the policy, if you will, or dictate what the tone is going to be. Just take a step back maybe and let fans do that. And Red and I have had that discussion many times, and that's the way he worked, and it saw him to a Hall of Fame career.
Final question, and I'm going to let you go. I appreciate this very much.
My pleasure.
You're wearing the bow tie today.
Indeed.
I'd like to ask you, who wore it first? Was it you, or was it TSN's John Liu?
John is a pretender to my throne. And John and I get along wonderfully. We're great friends. Of course, John has more people who see him on TSN, so inevitably people will see me wearing the bow tie. Of course, they're always tie around. I wore a clip-on when I was 4 years old, and there's a picture of myself with a horrified look on my face, and I think that I kind of joke, I say that's when I learned that my mother put a clip-on around my neck. So John and I kid about it, but because he's on TSN, a lot more people see him. So people will heckle me and say, oh, you're following John Liu. Well, it's the other way around.
I can't thank you enough for doing this. This was a real pleasure for myself, and I wish you a really good season.
Thank you, David. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is wonderful, actually, coming to this building and being as quiet as it is, because in a few hours this place will be rocking and it'll be shaking at the foundation. But thanks for having me.
All right.